History gets polished, edges smoothed. But revolutions are not clean. They are born in fire, in smoke, in men who hold the line when fear claws at the ribs. Victory was not inevitable. The revolution was forged in war. But it is understood in conversation, around tables, between friends. This is Rogue Island, ground truth of the American Revolution.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Bjorn Bruckshaw. I am here with my good friend Ben Powers on our second episode of Rogue Island. As you guys remember, last week we talked about Christopher Greene and the Battle of Pines Bridge. And during that conversation we talked about, there was a guy named James De Lancey, a colonel of the Westchester refugees who was a loyalist. We have decided today to talk about him. And Ben, you want to introduce yourself again?
Yeah, I'm Ben Powers. I'm good friends with Bjorn Bruckshaw, just a couple of history nerds geeking out on the stuff we love. And exactly what Bjorn was saying last week, we were talking about the death of Christopher Greene, and was this a targeted assassination? And who's this guy Delancey? Is he like a northern tarleton? And he comes across as kind of a son of a bitch. But I think that Bjorn has found a few things that might soften his reputation a little bit. But I want to start examining his reputation, Bjorn, directly from our first assumption that this was kind of a hard-nosed guy, and the Cowboys were kind of a bunch of desperados and bandits who, while an effective force operating in the neutral ground, are not what you would even consider an irregular light force. These guys are really just kind of a rough crowd. But what was your take? Are these guys like Tarleton's Legion, or are these guys more like a bandit outlaw group?
So I think they're more of like a bandit outlaw group. I mean, the name Cowboys, and the reason why they got the name Cowboys is because they were known from stealing numerous amounts of cows from the Continental Army and local, Continental militia and whatnot. So that's where the name Cowboys come in. But to me, from what I've read and everything, they were, and I don't know the exact word to describe it because they were brutal. They were bandits. They're almost like pirates on the land, right?
Gotcha.
Where pirates out in the ocean would just hack away and get what they wanted. They didn't care how they got it, and then they would leave. And that's what happened. That's what Delancey did. At one point, they attacked multiple outposts from the Continental Army and local militia, killed multiple people just to steal their crops. And to me, that says something about you.
No, exactly.
Right?
I mean, but it's especially in the 18th century, nobody's ordering anything off Amazon. Subsistence is a big deal, especially in wartime. These guys did not have the means probably to operate their own farms, working with a loyalist, a regular outfit. So, food's important to keep your force in the field. One thing I find interesting, if you're talking about Delancey as sort of like this pirate king almost, he's was part of Delancey's brigade. So there's so many Delanceys running around. So you've got Oliver Delancey Sr., who raised Delancey's brigade, if I'm not mistaken, of loyalists for the 1776 campaign.
Right.
And it had 3 battalions, 2 of which wound up operating in the South later during the war. But James De Lancey, his nephew, commanded the 3rd Battalion, and that's the one that stayed in the Highlands and became the Cowboys.
Yes.
So I wonder if the separation from the parent, so to speak, discipline got a little looser, and the brother against brother nature of combat in the neutral ground made them more of a ruthless, irregular force rather than a component of a larger loyalist brigade. I wonder if that had an effect on how they developed.
That's a good question. I don't know, because I think, well, first of all, the Delancey family comes from a huge loyalist family in New York. They're well known, and they hated African Americans. They despised them. But they thought that they were these rich, well-known, so they think, well, I could do whatever I want. I'm going to get whatever I want, and I'm going to continue to do it no matter what happens without any repercussions. So they had this
sense of entitlement.
Yes, exactly. And it's like when you read about them, you see it come out with that sense of entitlement and thinks he's better because of some of the stuff he's done. But then there's things that I've read that I'm like, why? I think he's brutal, but then he comes across doing something like this. Like for one instance, when he was 17 years old, there's a French doctor who De Lancey and three other guys, or excuse me, either two or three other guys had run across, and they were playing cards to dictate who would kill this French doctor. Okay. Now, to me, I don't know about you, but if I'm playing cards to kill somebody, I'm leaving. I'm not playing cards. You
No,
know
I
what I
got you.
mean?
It's almost a level of not caring about
Yes.
a level of not caring about humanity. Almost like worried about the trappings of civility, but not really worried about being civil. And I wonder
Yes.
if that was just part of his psychological makeup and that permeated how he led his troops. Because as we all know, leadership infects how an organization operates. That's
Absolutely.
what's that
And
line from Remember the Titans? Attitude reflects leadership.
absolutely. Couldn't an officer couldn't have said it better. Um, but when I was reading that, it also shows the type of guys he was with, right? So what happened was they're playing cards and they had to pick cards or whatever. His card was picked to kill the French doctor. He declined to do it. He declined to do it and said, "This is not what I'm about." So one of the other guys picks up a pistol and shoots the French doctor in the head while the French doctor was begging for his life, explaining how many kids he has, begging and saying, "I'll do whatever I can, please spare my life." One of the guys picks up the pistol and shoots him.
Now, was this at the end of the French and Indian War, 7 Years War? Like what?
Yes, it was
Because
right at the
Delancey,
end.
I want to say Delancey was born, what, like 44? So this would have been like 1761 or so?
So he was born 6 September 1746.
Okay.
So he was born in 1746.
So this would have been
He was,
right at the end of the war.
yeah, it was right at that, I guess, where the peace talks are starting to happen and all that stuff. And then there was another incident where one of his loyalist soldiers had gone and stole a horse from one of the local townspeople. And he killed the guy that the horse belonged to. When De Lancey found out about it, De Lancey had that loyalist soldier killed for what he did.
Interesting.
Right? So that gets in my head is like, number one, when he was 17 and he stopped and said, "I'm not killing that guy," was that the type of person he was before he joined the war? And then number two, with the killing of the loyalist soldier that stole the horse, did he go back to what he was before the war? Did he change? When he joined that war, was he brutal and brutal because he saw what was going on? Because he also had his land taken away by people in New York and by the Continental Congress because he was a loyalist. So they took everything.
It almost sounds like Delancey had his own code of ethics that he didn't bother explaining to anyone. That so those of us watching his actions can't be like, this doesn't seem consistent, but internally he was following his own, like I said, his own logic. And you brought up a really good point earlier, which really, we're not supposed to judge people, by the standards of our time, but the irrational hatred for non-whites. So it makes me just wonder if he was offended by the existence of Greene's regiment with its
So
20% people of color.
he had his family owned slaves. He believed that they shouldn't be free, that they don't have any rights, that they're treated like animals. That's what he believed. Because when he ended up being when the war was over and he left to go to Nova Scotia, he had 6 African Americans enslaved with him, and there were times where he would take them and just brutally whip them because they didn't listen to him. So I think between we talked about Toden, the guy that had notified him about Greene's plans, also being um, hating African Americans and wanting to kill them all. And you have told him in Delancey's ear talking about, hey, let's go do this. They deserve it. You don't like African Americans. I don't like African Americans. Major Flag and Colonel Christopher Greene are over there. We got the chance to kill him. So I think when he had somebody in his ear, he had to stand up and be like, yeah, I'm kind of the leader of this group. I'm going to go do it. We're
And
going
you
to
had
do it.
indicated that you have found paperwork, like primary sources, that the purpose of the mission was the capture or death of Greene. It was not
Absolutely.
what happened to Greene was not incidental to the
Oh,
operation.
no. It was planned. And so what happened was, and the way this all kicked off was, and how they planned the Battle of Pines Bridge, excuse me. What happened was General Washington sent a letter to Christopher Greene because he was hearing about all these raids and the brutality that Delancey's regiment and refugees were having, and just everything he was doing. And he told Greene he needs them captured or dead, one of them. Well, Toden found out about it, and when he was released, he went back to he went back to Delancey and told him, hey, they have a letter. General Washington put an order out to have you killed or captured. And Delancey told me, he goes, I know. He goes, my spies have told me. And when Totem told him exactly what was going on and how Greene wasn't, defending the area very well because he didn't think he would attack, Delancey was like, you know what, I'm going to be proactive. I'm gonna react and do something before they capture or kill me. So that's where Delancey decides we're going to do this, and that's where the whole thing comes together over a letter sent by George Washington.
Gotcha. And we've indicated before we talked about this in the last episode that Delancey's operation was, rather professionally done for a group of cowboys. They infiltrate the AO, they break up after they cross the Crofton River, or is it Croton or Crofton? Excuse me.
Rotten.
So they split into two columns after they cross the Croton River. One knows where the Davenport House is, which is Greene's headquarters. They go straight for it. They've got a good indication of where the other outposts of the First Rhode Island Regiment are. I think there's some Massachusetts regiments or troops from
There's some
Massachusetts.
Massachusetts and New Hampshire.
So they've got a decent location of where those guys are near like the Montrose House, some other homes that you had indicated, and they split off a column to deal with them, and they basically launch a timed multi-pronged assault that succeeds. So that speaks very well of Delancey's irregulars, despite the fact that we said that they're a bunch of cowboys. But I still can't get over the idea that First Rhode Island, which has a tremendous reputation, and Greene, who has a tremendous reputation, allowed this to happen.
I know.
Obviously they did because they did not win the battle, but it's so against everything I know about the level of professionalism that Greene and his troops
Yeah.
evinced in other battles.
Yeah, and you think about it because of his defense at Fort Mercer and how smart of a good and how such a good commander he was, and attention to detail, and not only that, but his cousin was Nathaniel Greene, right? He grew up with him. I mean, you got this guy who's one of the best generals, and you figured, hey, I got to be on my toes up here. But to be that, I wouldn't say lackadaisical, but more of unaware of what actually is going on and not actually thinking anything's going to be happening.
Exactly. So it just makes me wonder, was it a matter again of, hey, we fought against the Hessians down at Fort Mercer. I've got 5 years of combat experience. I don't think Delancey's that big a threat. And you let your guard down because you underestimate your enemy. I don't want to put myself in Greene's head. I've seen no primary sources about what he considered Delancey as a commander, but it just seems very out of character. And I'm wondering if you've come across any primary sources, even after the battle and after Greene was killed and recovered, where any of the Continental Army officers or professional officers were saying, hey, did they do any type of after action review or any censure of the First Rhode Island Regiment for allowing this to occur?
You know, I haven't found anything where, they do an after action report, where they go in and they see, okay, what happened?
And I
How did
realize
this
that's a
happen?
20th century term that I'm applying
Yeah,
200
sorry.
years earlier, but you get what I'm saying.
Absolutely. And I don't think they know, they didn't, all they knew at the time, number one, is they lost one of their best commanders, the commander of the first African American regiment, and they were decimated. They were brutally, brutally hacked to pieces. And I don't think they were at the point where, like, okay, we got to figure out why this happened. I think they knew what De Lancey was about. I think they understood him, but I don't think they sat back and said, what do we do differently?
Gotcha.
And going back to Delancey had this reputation of being one of the most feared loyalist units in the region at the time.
And I imagine this operation supported that reputation.
Oh,
Uh,
absolutely. I mean, there was even I was when I was looking through all these different sources, and I came across a source that talks about how when they retreated and they left after the battle, I wouldn't say they retreated, but they left.
they withdrew. It
They,
was a raid. It was
they
a planned
withdrew.
withdrawal.
Yep, it was a planned withdrawal. They went to a house, and there was an officer or two who had their swords out, bragging about how much blood was on their sword and who had more than the other person.
Again, attitude reflects
So that
leadership.
says something out of the whole thing, right? So that's the fear that people talk about. And now Delancey's in charge of this. He's the one that's allowing this to continue. So, to, they say that, orders come downhill, right? They come from the top and go to the bottom. So, if I had done something in the military that was unprofessional and unconduct or, ungentlemanlike back then, I would have gotten in trouble and the orders would have came down to say, cut it out. You don't do this. You don't do that. But none of that happened with Delancey.
Well, have you seen any indication, despite being the 3rd Battalion of Delancey's brigade, have you seen any indication that Delancey had any type of oversight from New York City, from Clinton, from anyone? Or was he just like, I do what I want?
He was more of a, I do what I want, because you had mentioned earlier his uncle, I believe it
Yep.
was the General Oliver, right? Oliver
Oliver
Delancey.
Delancey.
And guess who he answered to? And they both had the same mindset and the same ideological, thoughts on slavery and what they're doing and the loyalist aspect of it. So he's like, you kill whoever you need to do to get the job done to feed the army, right? So I don't think he answered to somebody, but he really didn't answer to somebody.
I get what you're saying.
So I think there's a big I can do what I want.
And he also had, I'm not condoning brutal behavior, but he also had a very personal reason to fight the way he did. He was trying to get his home back.
Yes, he was very much so not
Yeah.
happy with the fact that they took his home.
Exactly. If the Loyalists didn't win, if the British didn't win, well, we saw what happened. They didn't, and he had to leave the country. He moved to Nova Scotia, Annapolis, Nova Scotia, if I'm not mistaken.
Absolutely, he did. And it's after the war, and we had found documents, and I think we talked about this about Christopher Greene, and this kind of, I don't know, and I think we talked about it where I don't know if it's being brutal or like haha type thing, but when he killed Christopher Greene or when Christopher Greene and Major Flagg were killed, he had bloodied cloth.
Yep,
Or
I
something
remember you
along those
mentioned that he sent
lines.
to Washington.
Yes, and gave back right after the war, right before he left for Nova Scotia.
See, I really, again, can't get inside a guy's head 250 years after the fact, but to me, that almost seems like taunting. Like you could say on the surface, oh, it was this gentlemanly thing to return the property of these brave officers. Part of me thinks it's just like, yeah, look what I did to your boys.
And absolutely, I think you're right, because the gentlemanly thing would be like, I have his sword. I would like to return it to you.
Exactly.
Right? I'm not going to take a piece of its cloth with his blood on it and be like, ha, here you go. This is all I have of them. Right? And not only that, but you got to look at the timing. He did it right before he left for Nova
Right.
Scotia.
Exactly. Just kind
So
of
it's like,
let
here
me
you
let me get
go.
well, I'm leaving, but let me get a dig in before I go.
Absolutely. So it's kind of like, yeah, I think you're right, Ben. I think he was kind of be like, ha ha, I got you. I got the best of you. Right? I hacked you guys to pieces. This is the last thing you ever see of him. And here you go.
Yeah. And
Right?
that
So
and that kind
that's
of puts a final spin on it. I think we've kind of established the way Delancey thought. Now, we got to put out the caveat: neither Bjorn or I are a psychologist or a psychiatrist, and we're budding historians, but we're doing this for fun. But this is the kind of speculation that friends have when they're digging deep and just kind of also overlaying their own experiences. Everybody knows that one crazy guy in the squad. Uh, and so this is what happens when you give the crazy guy in the squad a 300-man legion and tell him to go do what he wants.
and I just want to go back real quick and mention this. And this kind of messes with my head too, because before the war, from, if I'm correct, 1769 to 1776, he was the sheriff of Westchester County. So, like, how do you put somebody in like that in charge of being a sheriff?
Hey, because he's keeping order, man. He's ruling with an iron fist. And that actually, to me, again, more pop psychology. So he went from being a landowner and a valued member of the community and somebody with political power to being completely knocked out of any type of authority. So that must have rankled him even more. I mean,
Absolutely. And to piggyback off that, when he got to Nova Scotia, he received a land grant from the British and established a new life. He married Martha Tippett and had 10 children, indicating that he successfully rebuilt his family and social standing despite his losses. Now, when he was up there, he entered into public life, serving in the House of Assembly and later the council positions that reflect his continued influence.
interesting. Oh, again, an ambitious guy. Didn't let something like losing a war slow him down, I guess, man.
And then he died on May 2nd, 1804.
Oh, there it is, folks. So that's the Ballad of James De Lancey. So Bjorn, what do we got coming up next? What are we thinking for our next episode, man?
So actually, we have a special episode coming up on Saturday. Our viewers may not be aware, but you and I did a archaeological dig at Saratoga back in 2021. Somebody wasn't there when the cannonball was found, and unfortunately, he wasn't there. But over the summer, I took my daughter up to Saratoga, and she was able to hold the cannonball and see a bunch of stuff. And she has been begging to come on and to talk. So my daughter's going to come on and talk about the Revolutionary War, and especially with Battle of Saratoga.
Awesome. So everybody tune in next week. We're going to interview Grace Bruckshaw and her expertise in the Battle of Saratoga. So Bjorn, take us out, man.
Thank you guys. I appreciate you guys paying attention. I hope you like our series so far. If you guys have any questions or recommendations, please leave them in the comments. We're more, and if you want to reach out, you can reach out. We're on Facebook as well at Rogue Island. And I hope you guys have the rest of an amazing week, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Take care.
Take care.